Ignoring divorce scandal, Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson travel across England. Jamie Dornan stood by the window, a cup of bitter coffee in his hand, looking out at the street, where people were passing by, yellow taxis, hurried footsteps, new movie posters, and yellow leaves falling softly in the wind. In his heart, worry. The divorce from Amelia Warner, the scandal in the newspapers, like a dark cloud that would never lift. But today, he had decided to put the noise behind him, even if it was difficult, to let the pain not harden his hand toward someone else, toward Dakota Johnson. Dakota Johnson arrived in London the next morning, carrying a small suitcase, an ash-grey wool coat, and warm leather boots. She didn't say much when she met Jamie in the hotel lobby, just a small smile, her eyes youthful and tired. "Coffee?" he suggested. She nodded. "A cappuccino, if you like." And so they sat in a small corner of the quaint cafe, where the steam from the espresso machine rose, the scent of cinnamon rolls wafted in the air. Dakota looked out the window, watching the passers-by, then turned to Jamie. "Are you okay?" Jamie put down his coffee. He hesitated for a second, then said, "I'll be fine. Just want to do something else. Want to move around a bit. Get away from everything." Maybe that was why he'd asked Dakota to come along, not to escape, but to find some normalcy. A trip around England, with no strict itinerary, small towns, coastal roads, abandoned castles, windy meadows. The first time they left London was Cornwall, heading southwest. The highway wound through soft hills, hydrangea gardens of 1,000 colors, pale gray slate roofs, and white-framed windows. Jamie drove, Dakota sitting beside her, her eyes on the blue sky and the white clouds. She put her hand on the window, the cold air tingling the tips of her fingers. "I think Amelia will understand," she said softly. Jamie looked at her, his voice low. "I'm not sure, but I want her to know that I'm trying not to let anything destroy whatever beauty is left." In Cornwall, they stopped at Tintagel, the legendary castle associated with Arthurian legend. The dry sea breeze blew through her hair, the sea crashed against the cliffs, the echoes of the waves making Dakota's heart pound with each beat. He led her to the highest point, where she could see the far shore, the small islands shrouded in mist. They sat on a large rock, silent as the wind howled and the waves lapped against the rocks. Dakota took Jamie's hand, holding it firmly. No words, just presence. From Cornwall, they traveled through Devon and up into Somerset. At night, they slept in quaint bed and breakfasts, where the hosts left out a pot of tea and apple scones in the morning. On a misty evening in a small village whose name no one seemed to remember, there was a warm pub, dimly lit with yellow lights, the smell of ginger beer and cider. Jamie talked about his early years, about when he was younger, about wanting to do roles with soul and not just fame. Dakota listened, her eyes shining with sympathy. She talked about how whenever she walked beside him, she felt the weight of the media, the flashing cameras, the news, the gossip. "But I want everything else," she said, her gaze sincere. Jamie smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Then we'll do everything else. At least this once." The next day, they continued north, to the lands of Dorset and Wiltshire, where Stonehenge stood, ancient stones standing tall on the moors, like silent sentinels to the past. Dakota approached, looking up at the sky. It was dark, black as velvet, the new moon hidden behind the clouds. The wind cut through her thin wool coat. Jamie put his arm around her, to keep her warm. In that moment, Jamie remembered what Amelia had said, "I want people to remember us with respect, even when we are apart." He told himself, "That's all I want. Not the sensationalism of the media, not the loud debate, but the truth that even when relationships change, people can still have a little kindness." Northern England beckoned with its golden wheat fields, its small farms hidden behind grey stone fences, its ancient towns steeped in history. They reached the Lake District, where the lakes were like mirrors, reflecting the mist-shrouded mountains. Jamie rowed a small boat on Lake Windermere in the early morning, the mist drifting across the surface, the only sound being the clatter of the oars. Dakota sat behind him, his head resting on his shoulder, his arm draped over her. "I like it here," she said, her voice faltering. "Me too," Jamie said. "Here, I don't feel like anyone's watching me like I'm a sensation." Dakota sighed. That feeling of always having to play a role, even if it's just to be quiet. Jamie was silent, his oars rolling steadily across the water. He thought of Amelia, of the press releases, of the pain not just of his loved ones, but of what the public had made of them. He wondered if he had done the right thing, for himself, for others. In Edinburgh, they walked through cobblestone streets, moss-covered iron railings, cozy little tea-houses. The city was misty, the castles standing on high hills overlooking the Scott River, the yellow lights through the castle windows flickering in the wind. Jamie led Dakota to the old castle, then to a traditional tea house, a band playing violins softly in a corner. They sat by the window, the smoke rising from the teapot, the sound of people talking softly. Dakota looked at him. "It feels like I'm living two lives, one in the eyes of everyone, one in moments like this." Jamie nodded slightly. "This is the life I want to keep for myself. No matter how noisy it is outside, at least there are moments when no one interferes." After Edinburgh, they drove further north, to the Highlands of Scotland, the Cairngorms National Park, scattered snow-capped peaks, deep, quiet lakes, the sound of streams running over rocks. They slept in a small wooden chalet. At night, sitting by the fire, the crackling fire, the reflection of the fire in their eyes, a simple warmth after a long cold day. Jamie took out a small ukulele he had brought with him in the car. He strummed a few chords, singing softly, not a famous song, just words he had written himself. In the cold wind, "You're by my side like the morning sun though the clouds are dark. We still look at each other and feel peace." Dakota turned, his eyes sparkling. "You wrote it?" Jamie smiled. "Yeah. When the yellow leaves fall on the road, when the sea breeze is cold, when you don't know what tomorrow will bring but still want to believe in tomorrow." Dakota leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you for bringing me here." On the way back to England, from Scotland down to Newcastle, Durham, and York, the rain began to pour down. They took shelter in an old Gothic church that had been converted into a small hostel. That night, the sound of rain on the tin roof, the sound of water hitting the windows, the dim candlelight through the stained glass, it was all like a fairy tale. Jamie and Dakota lay side by side, listening to the rain, talking about the future. Dakota asked, "Do you think the media will let us go?" Jamie put his hand on her chest, where his heart was beating in a promise-like rhythm. "No one can control people forever. I can't promise that everything will pass, but I promise that it won't destroy us." She was silent for a moment, then said, "I want to remember this trip. Not because of the scandal, but because we found a place, for a while, at least, where the heart is not challenged." Returning to London by train, from York through the Midlands, arriving in the ancient city of Oxford in the late afternoon. Oxford was ablaze with the orange of sunset, its red roofs, its ancient lecture halls, the trees withered by time. Jamie and Dakota walked through the student square, past the Bodleian Library, over the small bridge over the Cherwell, where swans floated gently. They dropped off at a second-hand bookshop, a dusty shop, high wooden shelves, leather-bound books and yellowed paper. Dakota chose a volume of Emily Dickinson poetry, Jamie a work of Shakespeare. He whispered, "I want to take some of the beauty of this place with me, so that when you go home and open the book, you will remember that there was a time when we were just two people, not a story in the newspaper." The following week, they were seen again, Jamie and Dakota, walking on Tower Bridge at dusk, their eyes quiet, not wanting to hide but not wanting to ignore. People took pictures of them, the lens peeking through her hair, over his shoulder. The headlines started rolling. Jamie Dornan takes Dakota Johnson on vacation amid criticism after divorce scandal. Dakota in Jamie's shadow. Is she the replacement? But this time, Jamie didn't answer. Neither did Dakota. They shared a handshake, gentle, as an affirmation. We're here because we want to be. One afternoon on the last day of the trip, they reached Brighton Beach. The sand was wet from the high tide, the waves were crashing, the wooden house roofs were brightly colored, the white cotton candy donuts were flashing in the sunset. Jamie and Dakota rented a tandem bike and rode along the beach, the sea breeze blowing their hair, laughter mixed with the sound of the waves. She looked out to sea and said, "I think I'm ready." Jamie turned and asked, "Ready for what?" "To face what's out there. To stop running away." He stopped the bike, parked it on the side of the road, pulled her down, and looked her gently in the eyes. "Me too." They sat on the beach, barefoot in the sand, listening to the sound of the ocean and thinking, no matter what, no matter how much noise they made, let's keep a peaceful corner for each other. So that if one day, the memories get tired, we can still find our way back to this place. The day we parted ways was near, not parting ways, but parting ways on the trip. The media was always after them, the pictures, the headlines, the gossip. But deep down, they both knew they had done the right thing, not for anyone else, but for themselves. Dakota boarded the plane back to Los Angeles, Jamie headed back to London. As Dakota's plane took off, he stood at Heathrow, watching, his hands empty, but his heart no longer feeling empty. A few weeks later, on a rare sunny London afternoon, Jamie sat in his small studio, his desk cluttered with scripts, his journal, his tape recorder. He wrote down his thoughts from that trip, wrote about Amelia, about the beautiful moments they shared, and wrote about Dakota, about how she reminded him of something simple, just being himself. He knew, there might still be gossip out there, there might still be signs of criticism, but he also knew, without this trip, without those quiet days in the car, on the Brighton beach, by the fire in the Highlands, he might have let himself fall apart. And then one winter afternoon, peacefully in his small house on the outskirts of London, Jamie received a text from Dakota. "Thank you for the trip. For the unpretentious moments. I believe I am stronger, at least because I dared to hold on to the ordinary days." He looked at the phone screen, smiling. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, spreading gold across the wooden floor. Jamie told himself, this is what counts. Not the rumors, not the divorce, but the fact that he had kept himself together during the stormy days. And finding someone like Dakota, who made him feel like he could be at peace, could be a better person, that was the real miracle.